Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hamlin, I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and we'd really like to thank Icolite for sponsoring this episode. Icolite make a wide variety of housings and strobes and other accessories for a lot of different camera models, so please head on over to icolite.com and check out what they're up to. I'd like to introduce Alex Mustard, my fellow correspondent. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Adam.
Our Southern England correspondent.
Yeah, well, you can tell from the sunshine colours of my T-shirt and the beautiful blue water behind me.
There we go.
It's from the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, I was going to say it should be the blue water consultant. Anyway, so often on Wetpixel Live, we find ourselves discussing about the latest and greatest, newest, most high resolution camera tech, and obviously many underwater photographers are fascinated by the advances in technology. But having said that, what we notice is, this is certainly for us as traveling photographers in normal times, that as these camera systems get more advanced, they also get often, or they certainly don't get any lighter. They don't necessarily get any heavier, but they don't get any lighter or easier to manage. So what I thought I'd ask Alex, I'd like to ask Alex for some advice about how to downsize my camera rig. Rather than going big, how do I go small? Over to you, Alex.
Well, I think it's a really good question, and it's one that comes up a lot. I think there's an active thread at the moment on Wetpixel about it. I get emails a lot from people who are, I shoot a big fancy SLR, and you know what? I'm fed up with lugging it onto planes, squeezing it into hand luggage, arguing with check-in staff, dragging it on shore dives, passing it up to the boat, carrying it from the room to the, to the dive boat or whatever. And there's a lot of, and people look very enviously at people with very small cameras who are taking, absolutely fantastic pictures. So It is a very common question, but I think it's easy to try to downsize and actually get it wrong. And I think that the question that I get asked, regularly is, would going to mirrorless give me this downsize? And the answer to that is yes and no. And it's important to understand why no is in that. And I think, first of all, that particularly if you're a full frame photographer and you think, right, I want to go to full frame mirrorless because that will make my kit smaller, it might marginally, but in terms of a full system, you're talking a few percent and a lot of money to make that change, to save yourself really a few percent. And to be honest, if you attach your dive computer to your camera, you've probably made the difference back up again in what you're doing. Because the reality is, the big ports, the big strobes, the big strobe arms, are all weigh the same, and the difference in size and bulk between a typical SLR housing and a typical full frame mirrorless housing is very small. The weights of the cameras are a little bit lighter, but it's a few hundred grams. The lenses are often a little bit heavier, so you kind of lose that back again. And the housings are sometimes a bit smaller, but they're very rarely any lighter. So I think it's, that is a misconception that people often think of. Now, if you fancy the idea of shooting mirrorless, that's great. And on one of the last workshops I ran, which was back in prehistory, it feels like these days, I had a Z7 on loan from Nauticam for the trip, and I was lending it around the group. And some people didn't like it compared to their SLRs. And some people loved it, and they're like, this is the way I'm going for my next camera. So I'd encourage anyone to make sure you have a proper try with a mirrorless camera, and particularly if you can try one underwater, because for some people, it's exactly what they've been looking for. And for other people, they're like, oh, no, I really like, what I've got. So I think that's a very justifiable reason to switch. But the weight saving one isn't if you're just going full frame to full frame. I think in the crop sensor realm, I don't think that the mirrorless offerings are really as good as the full frame ones. And I know that's a bit of a sweeping generalization, but I don't think that Nikon or Canon's crop sensor mirrorless cameras, the 1.5 times crops, are really anything to write home about. I think that the advantage of them, if you're going from, say, a crop sensor SLR into those cameras, is that you do have a bit of lens carryover. But frustratingly, not all of the lenses carry over. For example, if you're a Nikon D500 shooter and you fancy shooting a crop sensor Z, you can move your macro lenses over, but you can't use your lovely 10 to 17 fisheye because it won't work on that camera. So
I think that's a really important point. I think, for crop sensor shooters, one of the major advantages of shooting a crop sensor camera underwater is the ability to be able to use that Tokina lens. I think if that Tokina, okay, there are other lenses that do a good job, the 8-15s, Canon and Nikon, so on and so forth. But yeah, it's expensive, and so much of the sort of focal length that you've got isn't really that useful.
And the 8-15 is a big bulky thing. If
Yeah,
the whole point is to save weight, saying, oh yeah, your solution is to buy a massive, great 8-15,
and you're still using an adapter, so you're kind of not winning anything, and you are removing. So it doesn't seem to me. Now there are other fixes available. You can start using wet optics. The Nauticam WWL type lenses. These will do the job, and certainly you can team these up. But again, you're in a situation where life is becoming arguably more complicated, and also you're compromising not necessarily image quality, but you're compromising on possibly coverage or other issues. So
I think with WWL, your penalties are weight, because they are heavier than dome ports, whatever whatever else you measure up them against, and also angle of coverage. In that they are nice wide angle lenses, particularly for big animals, but they're not a match for a fisheye in terms of shooting scenery, shooting shipwrecks, creating space in wide angle pictures underwater. And that is, I think, a big loss. I think a point I really want to make in this sweeping generalization is that the Sony crop sensor mirrorless cameras can take the 10-17, and I think that is a strength of that choice. I think the downside of those is in the past they've not had the world's greatest autofocus for macro. And I think one of the downsides of the Sony crop sensor route is it's a bit of a niche area. And generally, particularly if you're a traveling underwater photographer, it's good to have the same gear as lots of other people on the trip, because that way, should you have problems, people know how the gear works. They might have gear they can lend you. And at the moment, the Sony crop sensor mirrorless cameras are, on most trips, there's kind of just one person who's shooting them, if that. So you don't have that backup of everyone else into the same gear as you. And
you also have the issue. I mean, it's a somewhat, but generally, your housing choices are more limited in terms of what's available. So manufacturers, when one of the major manufacturers, I include Sony in that now, release a new SLR or mirrorless full frame camera, you pretty much know they're all going to come out with a housing design for it. It's almost guaranteed, because they've got to compete with each other. Whereas it seems like, particularly the Sony crop sensor mirrorless, there seems to be some manufacturers are covering that particular niche, but a lot of them aren't going in because they don't see the volume that is available to them in those areas. So your housing choice is reduced. Now, that's fine. If there's housing out there that you like.
I'd add a cheeky point to that, which I've not really got that much basis on, is that in areas where the housing manufacturers know that there's a lot of competition from other brands, chances are they're going to try extra hard with their designs. Whereas in the areas where they know that probably them or only one other company is really making housings for that particular camera, maybe they're not going to try quite as hard, because they know they've got already a big monopoly. So, I don't know how much truth there is, and I'm sure all the housing manufacturers try very hard with all their housings. But with all engineering solutions, there's we could do it like this and it will be good, or we could do it like this and it will be excellent but more expensive. And and I would think in the areas where there's competition, they might decide on the second route more than the first route. Anyway,
it's a question of resources, isn't it? But yes, absolutely, quite agree. So
I need to get us back on topic. Is back to the downsizing thing, and the real thing that we want to talk about is, I think, micro four thirds, because I think that is the one area where there is the possibility to go from a very capable SLR system to a very capable mirrorless system that gives you a really noticeable size and weight saving across your system. However, I think it's important to start with some of the downsides, and the first thing is, I think it comes at a cost. You're not gonna. It's not a big money saver, and if you are changing from SLR into mirrorless, it basically means selling a complete set of gear and going into another complete set of gear. So, you haven't got any sort of legacy carryover. Nothing really is going to, none of your lenses are going to work on adapters. So it's a kind of sell everything, buy everything new way to save weight. But with the right camera choices, the weight saving, is really considerable, and the bulk saving is really considerable as well.
Yep.
With some of the bigger ones, the bulk saving is a bit less. I mean, they end up quite big systems. But
I think this is the point. It doesn't seem a point to me with if you're going down this route with Micro Four Thirds. Some of the sort of pro label bodies are actually pretty substantial beasts, and they're designed for press photographers, and they have extended battery lives and all the other things that those kind of cameras need to have. But really, you really want to consider, okay, I'm now doing this because I want a smaller system, so go with the smaller, more maneuverable, lighter models. And even the pro models, fine, they do what they do. But you probably, in this instance, is an example where you want to look beyond that and look at, well, I want a small camera here, not.
Yeah. My experience, I've owned quite a lot of Olympuses, for example, and my experience is it's often the one tier below the pro model is a really nice sweet spot in that you get nearly all the really useful functionality. And it's still a really, really good usable camera. I made the mistake early on is I downgraded from an original EM5 down to an EPL5, which is a more basic camera, thinking, wow, this thing is even smaller. My housing is even smaller. This is even better. Because it was the same sensor, and I thought but it wasn't as nice a camera to use, and it wasn't as capable. And I definitely felt I was missing out with that. So I would recommend, that sweet spot of kind of maybe one below the really big pro body is a good place to be looking, because you get the benefits of small without it being too basic a camera.
The elephant in the room here obviously is image quality. These are very competent cameras, but the reality is, if you put an image from a D850 on one side of your screen, or one screen, and an image from a Micro Four Thirds camera generically on this side of the screen, you are going to see a difference. There's no doubt about it. But the point is that if you're trying to get in the water and you're struggling with your camera system because it's big and heavy, or you're dragging it through airports, so you're ending up not bringing the camera system, for example, then surely what that's telling you is it's all well and good having all this amazing technology and all that, but you're actually not in the water taking pictures, or you're not taking pictures effectively because the size and bulk and weight of your camera system is affecting that. So
it's always what you pointed at, not the image quality that makes the difference. I think I would add to that argument that although you can see this difference, and I'm pretty sure this is where you were going with it, actually how significant that difference is for you is really the key question. And what I would say first of all is that I've shot Micro Four Thirds, and those pictures have been widely published. I've won in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year with Micro Four Thirds pictures. So for me, there's no doubt that Micro Four Thirds limits anything I want to do with my images at the moment. It doesn't. And you see that around the world with it takes you 10 minutes of research on Micro Four Thirds to find top level photographers in all genres choosing to use these cameras. Because they deliver the image quality they need as pro photographers. And yes, a D850 or the latest Sony or whatever has better image quality, but the reality is you can only get so much image quality on a page, and all these cameras are producing image quality that is more than good enough to be printed and look good. So as long as you're shooting well, don't need to do tons of post, don't need to do tons of cropping, you're not really throwing anything away when it comes to being on the page. And I think that's something that's quite hard to get your head around when you can see such a difference on the computer screen, because you can clearly see this one is better than that one. But the reality is that how often you need that additional image quality is arguable. And I think if the big weight saving and size saving and travel friendliness of the smaller system appeals, I think that argument is pretty easy to deal with. But I think you need to be ready for it, because if you do make that jump, particularly if you say go from that full frame camera down to Micro Four Thirds, you will see a loss in image quality compared to your old files. But you need to ask yourself how significant that loss is to you as a photographer. And for most people, it isn't significant. You just got to get over that sort of mental thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's quite true. Now, a really good way of kind of seeing, I think we tend to often approach these decisions backwards. What we really should do is go out and have a look and see what other people are shooting with and what results they're getting with the cameras they're using. Oftentimes we focus on the technology, and really what we should be focusing on is the images. And so, you know, certainly Alex's website, he's shot with both Micro Four Thirds and D850, so on and so forth. So you can Google, if you go to amustard.com, and you can search, correct me if I'm saying this right, Alex, you can search on there by terms of camera model. So you could put D850, you could put Olympus. Would Olympus work?
Yeah, I'm going to try. I'm going to try right now to on my other computer to, because I've never thought to search Olympus. Let's see what happens. Yeah, Olympus works. Yeah, just type Olympus in, and you'll see all my Micro Four Thirds pictures.
So I think this is a really, I mean, I think probably it would be quite a persuasive argument for those that are considering, you know, that your camera rig is too big, too heavy, and is limiting your productivity. You know, I think if you have a look on Alex's website, you'll see that the imagery that is possible with smaller cameras is worth considering, certainly. So
yeah, and I have to say that there are some, you know, absolutely fantastic underwater photographers shooting with Micro Four Thirds, and there are some amazing landscape and wildlife photographers too. And I think it's well worth digging into that world, because I think you can be very quickly coerced into realizing that, you know, these top people wouldn't be doing it. And I know there's a lot of really good nature photographers who are doing it, and people go, oh, they've been paid to do it. And, you know, the vast majority of them haven't. You know, they haven't taken it as they just decided that they can get exactly what they need as a pro photographer from this smaller system.
Yep. And ultimately, it's their living, isn't it? So, you know, the images they produce are important. You know, so yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. Wonderful discussion as always. And I'd like to thank our sponsor again. I'd like to thank Icolite. Icolite produce, as I mentioned in the beginning, an array of housings for almost every type of camera, including mirrorless, Micro Four Thirds, and obviously the full frame and compact sensor, prop sensor SLRs. I'd like to thank you all for watching very much. Please feel free to add a comment about your experiences in downsizing your cameras and camera system, and drop us a like if you enjoyed. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.